Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. One mic, two idiots, and, according to our latest figures, 3 listeners. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leaks.
Before we start, Andy, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsors, Money Farm. Now, Money Farm are the largest digital wealth manager in Europe, and they create portfolios of ETFs for their clients. They're incredibly cheap and ideal for somebody who's wanting to get into investing, and perhaps for more experienced investors who don't actually want to run their own money anymore. Now, they will even offer to run the first £20,000 of any of our listeners' portfolio absolutely free if they enter the code MTTM20K into the website at moneyfarm.com. For more information, check out their website. But for now, Andy, let's get back on with the show.
Hello and welcome to episode 127 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, how are you doing?
I'm good, Andy. I'm very good, actually. It's been a busy week because of tax year. I think I mentioned that last time, but we had the culmination of all that sort of work and busyness. It's always busy for the world of finance. It's quite nice to have got over that sort of hump, and then we're going into the new tax year. So hopefully I can refocus on some things rather than being reactive. I like to be
proactive.
Proactive is the word. So no, it's been good, and yeah, the sun is shining again, so I'm always positive. How about you, Andy? How's things with you?
Yeah, absolutely the same as I said last time. Busy with work and just trying to enjoy it. The children are off for Easter now, so it's nice to see them having a bit of a lay-in and not stressing about homework. And it's nice to see that. It's weird, isn't it, that we always think about sort of work-life balance and stress as adults, but the way that life is these days and the pressure that's put on children, even children sort of suffer that, albeit they don't really understand what it is, but they just know that they're kind of, they're being worked quite hard at school. And it's nice to see them with the shackles off and just enjoying watching a film, maybe staying up that little bit later. It's nice.
Yeah, D-mob happy. Yeah, I agree with you. And especially for the age that my oldest is at, where they do the SATs and things like that. Although I don't think they talk about it so much at school, I think there's still that pressure, isn't there, that goes with trying to make them, I don't know, learn certain things or whatever it is. So I quite like the fact that they have a bit of time off. And actually mentioning that is quite a good link in that we, just to inform listeners, we may not do a podcast next week. And I only just chuck it out there because it is Easter. It is a very short week and it's quite hard to get it squeezed in. And actually, Andy, you and I probably should spend a bit of time with our family. So we might not be here next week. If we are, then you can thank the Easter Bunny. But if we're not, we're going to be back the week after. But the one thing I would say is that there is still going to be the One Giant Leap podcast. So we've got an episode this week, which I will just quickly plug, which features an amazing lady called Scarlett, who I actually met this week for coffee, subsequent to the interview I did a couple of weeks ago, who started a side project to help the homeless. And it is an incredible thing that she did a few years ago, and in 6 weeks raised £35,000 just using her skill set in advertising to generate lots of interest and do things differently and reinvigorate a kind of an industry. The charity industry needs lots of innovation, and she did something amazing. Listen to her story. I actually almost I did have a lump in my throat at one point in her story when she tells a particular tale of what happened to her in London. So listen out for that one. It will be out by the time you've listened to this podcast. And the following week, so the Easter weekend, there will be another episode of the One Giant Leap podcast will come out. And that one features a friend of the show, actually, Pete Matthew, who he's never been on this show, but I've been on his podcast a couple of times. And the reason I had Pete, I interviewed him because he did some amazing things with podcasting, actually, funnily enough, was the main thing he did, in video, to do something different that was not the standard thing in the finance industry. He was pushing boundaries with technology and basically using his own persona and everything like that to change an industry, sort of in a similar way to what we do in a way, Andy. And I picked up his story because he's inspiring, because he's trying to push boundaries, but he's also, people might think that if an industry that you are in or part of, if you're not like one of the big players, you don't work for a major firm or something like that, you can't gain influence. I mean, Pete has a disproportionate influence in the industry, which is very much well deserved. But he lives down in southwest miles from central London, which is the typical place where everyone thinks the people, the happening people of the finance world live. So I just want to plug that one because it's a very good episode again, and Pete stays true to his principles, so do listen to that. But anyway, that was enough plugging for the One Giant Leap podcast. Do listen, subscribe and review. But on with this show.
Yeah, what have we got finance wise this week on the Money to the Masses podcast?
Right, on the Money to the Masses podcast, there are two meaty pieces that I want to get stuck into and try and make them as accessible as possible, as we always do. One of them is based around the tax year theme, actually, because now we've gone from the old into the new. There are some changes in the tax changes that I thought I would just list out for people as a kind of FYI that they notice that are out there, and they can then via our site or the wonders of Google find out a bit more information if they need. And the other piece is something that is very relevant to you and I, Andy, and many people who listen to the show. It's about childcare and cutting the cost of childcare, because there have been some new rules and changes that have come in or are coming in to do with how you can reduce the cost of childcare, namely one or two new schemes and some free initiatives from the government. So I want to touch upon that, and then at the end of the show I want to quickly just talk about something to do with investing.
Brilliant. Okay, so what are we going to do first?
Should we do the tax year stuff first? I think that would be it's a nice link. What's happening is there's a few changes that are going to happen as a result of April 2017. So if you listen to this in the future, you'll probably be aware of one or two of these now. But there have been some changes that have been announced as a result of various budgets in the past, but they only come into effect now. So I'm just quickly going to go through these. And the first one is, we've done podcasts in the past about there's a savings rate that everybody has, isn't there? The personal savings allowance, which shortens to PSA, which allows basic rate taxpayers to earn up to £1,000 in savings income tax-free. Now, that has been something that's been around since last year, and for higher rate taxpayers, that allowance is reduced to £500. What's happening, and it's just again a bit of an FYI, is that that's being applied to bond holdings. So if you invest in bonds, so bond funds that pay interest, that allowance is now being applied to that. So what will happen is you'll get paid any interest from those funds gross. The reason I mention it, more importantly, is that what people will need to make a note of this on their self-assessment tax returns if they don't invest within an ISA or a pension or a SIP, because therefore you don't pay tax if it's within those structures. So the key takeaway is, if you invest in something like a bond fund outside of a pension or an ISA, so one of those tax-free wrappers, then you need to be aware that you are probably going to have to therefore make an allowance for it or make a note of it within your personal tax assessment at the end of the tax year. So again, it's just a bit of an FYI, so you can look a bit more into that if that does affect you. I think most people really invest via ISAs and pensions. Our allowances are changing, of course, like you know, Andy, being an accountant, you always have to, the personal allowances go up, and I think this year it's going from £11,000 to £11,500 for most individuals if you get the full allowance. So yeah, the allowances are going to go up, so that's again a bit of an FYI. We touched upon this, well, we didn't touch upon it, we did a big piece last week on the new lifetime ISA, and that is now, as of me talking today, is in existence. So there are lifetime ISAs out there. If you want to know whether you can benefit from a lifetime ISA or what one is, very simply, it's a new form of ISA that's meant to help you get on the housing ladder or save for retirement. It's aimed at people under 40. Then listen to last week's show. But they are out, they are about, and although they are new, hardly anyone is offering them. There's only a few that are doing it. And
I read in the press this morning that I think the title headline was "Banks Shun New Lifetime ISA," and it was just a story about the fact that no one is really offering it.
Yeah, so it's a great incentive or idea. But I think what will happen, I do wonder whether they will scrap the idea in the future, because if it's not taken up and banks aren't offering these products, because there are savings rate versions, this is why banks are shunning them. They're not producing ones where it's just cash, but some of the big companies out there are doing, well, one or two, Hargreaves being one, a case in point, Hargreaves Lansdowne, they are one of the few people who are offering lifetime ISAs, but they're investment ones, so you can invest in stocks and shares. So they are out, and you should be able to invest in one if you want. Go and look at our website, moneytothemasses.com, where we talk more about it, explain it, or listen to last week's podcast. Talking of ISAs, the ISA allowance is going up. And so now you can invest £20,000 in an ISA now, so a normal stocks and shares ISA. And it used to be £15,240. That was last year. So that's a positive. You can actually save more. That doesn't matter if it's cash or stocks and shares, or in fact one of those new lifetime ISAs or an innovative finance ISA, but they all come under that one allowance. Another allowance, just to mention to people, is that there's a new inheritance tax allowance. We covered it when it was first announced, but do you remember this? Everyone has a nil rate band, so if you are to die, you end up having an allowance that you can pass on a certain amount of wealth, which is about £325,000, to the next generation without paying any inheritance tax on. Now, there are rules that you can pass stuff to your wife without paying tax, and there's lots of different sort of ways you can mitigate that. But what they wanted to do, they introduced a new allowance that was to do with your house, and it was to allow people to pass on property with a bit less inheritance tax, because the issue really is one that's aimed at the wealthy, I suppose, which is probably something that these politicians their reason it's there to help them out. But obviously in London and the South East, where property prices have risen the fastest, more people theoretically were likely to pay inheritance tax on passing on a house. So you've got these two bands, okay, for a husband and wife, so they can combine them, because obviously you can pass all your wealth onto your wife or vice versa, and then you can actually double your allowance. But what they're going to do is there's a new one that's coming in, and it's being staggered. So this year everybody has a new £100,000 allowance that can be applied to a property that you're going to pass on directly onto a descendant, namely like your children. And that can be applied on top of your normal inheritance tax allowance. And of course, again, husband and wives get one each. So as a couple, that's an extra £200,000 that they could use as an allowance against a property. So have a look about that. We've written about it on moneytothemasses.com, but it's just to say that this new inheritance tax level has come in. One of the key ones for anybody who's buy-to-let landlord out there is there was a lot that was made last year about the buy-to-let changes when it comes to mortgages and interest on any mortgage. So the new rules came in, and buy-to-let landlords used to be able to deduct all the interest paid on a loan from the rental income that they received, so it ended up being able to reduce their tax liability. Now that's now changed. Rules have come in to restrict that. So have a look at the rules, Google them, go onto our website, but it's just to say that has now come in, which makes buy-to-let less attractive. So it's actually skewing it more that it's profitable, or as profitable as it was before, for people who own houses outright. So if you're a buy-to-let landlord with cash and you don't need mortgages, then you're okay. But for people who have mortgages and we're using that offset to try and obviously increase their returns, then that is going to change. And the other one I just wanted to quickly touch upon before we move on is for people out there who may be withdrawing on their pension, because under pension freedoms that we've had for quite some time now, you can have a pension pot where you can start to access it, so you can start to withdraw an income, but it's still invested. So you're sort of taking bits and pieces. And some people might do that while they're working, and so you can theoretically still contribute to a pension even though you're withdrawing from another one. But what happened, it was to stop people doing something what they call pension recycling, where you could take it out of a pension and then pop it back in another one and get an extra bit of tax relief. Then that sort of cycle where, do you know what I mean? You've already got tax relief once. Some people might try and fiddle the system and get it again by taking it out and put it somewhere else. They limit that by giving allowances. So it used to be there was a £10,000 allowance that you had if you were taking money from a pension pot on what you could put in, because most of us have a £40,000 annual allowance which we can put into a pension. I say £40,000, but it's up to the amount that you earn, really, that you get tax relief on. So if you put more than that in, you don't get tax relief. But what's happening with these people, their £10,000 annual allowance is being dropped to £4,000. So I just wanted to flag it up to people, because if you are one of those people who are starting to, you might be working, you may be accruing some form of benefits that are paying into a pension, but you're withdrawing somewhere else, bear in mind that this new allowance has dropped, and no one is necessarily going to tell you that it has. You just need to be making sure you're not breaching those rules in any way. So again, go and find out a bit more information if that is you.
Good stuff. Good run through, Damien. I mean, some people say that tax and that kind of thing is boring, but no, that was still boring, but you did a good job of it.
Yeah, let's be honest, Andy. These things they are boring, but they are a necessity, aren't they? So, yeah, I did go through that at quite a pace, but I did want to keep the tempo going and just give people a lot of FYIs. So, yeah, that's why we have the One Giant Leap podcast, you see, Andy. We want to inspire, and people are starting to nod off. So what we'll do is we'll go on to the next bit, which is about childcare.
Before we do that, let's just play a little bit of this.
Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers and the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Right, childcare and childcare costs. There's a few new bits and pieces that people need to be aware of, and it could help them to save money.
Yeah, I mean, you know as well as I do, Andy, that childcare costs, they are expensive. And it stops a lot of people returning to work who want to. There'll be people listening to this podcast who may have wanted to go back to work when they've had children, but the cost of childcare has basically been prohibitive, because by the time they pay the £50 plus a day or whatever it costs, and then they factor that in when they go to work and they travel and tax and everything, they actually can work out worse off, so they don't go back to work, which is a massive shame, because I think people lose out, the economy loses out, people's own well-being, because as much as everyone loves being a parent, we have to all realise, and I can speak personally, sometimes it is good to be able to go and have a self-esteem outside of just bringing up your own children, isn't it?
That's right, and interestingly, I'm sorry to bring it back to the One Giant Leap podcast again, but the episode 2 of the One Giant Leap podcast focuses on Ricky Willis, who did exactly that. He had to basically give up work because it was easier or more affordable for him and his family, for him to be able to stay at home and be a stay-at-home dad to look after the children, because of the rising costs in childcare, and also, the travelling to London every day. So it is a real thing. People are not going to work because of the costs of childcare.
Yeah, and so I don't know about you, but I mean, if you don't have children, don't turn off this bit, because the reason I'm going to talk about it is, well, it is relevant, because you may have children in the future, but the chances are you're going to have somebody who is probably finding it difficult, relative or whatever, with childcare. And I just think it's so confusing, the help that's out there. I find it baffling, and I've sat down and I've gone through this for this podcast. And it is confusing because there are some new schemes out there. Now, I'm going to just throw out the first ones that people might or might not know, but that there is some element of free childcare that people get. So for 3 and 4-year-olds, everybody gets at least 15 hours a week free childcare that they can use against registered Ofsted nurseries, and that's for at least 38 weeks a year. So I've used this in the past for my children, and I will use it for my my youngest, who will end up at some point probably going into nursery or whatever. So that allows you to have some free childcare, but that's okay. I mean, it won't cover everything if you need to go back to work, because 15 hours a week is nothing. I mean, a lot of nurseries won't even allow you to split it over various days. I mean, they have their own rules. There's no government stipulation that they have to do it on separate days, or you can even lump it together or anything like that. They can still do what they want. Now, going forwards, what's going to happen is that is going to be doubled to 30 hours, but only for certain people. There's criteria, and some of that criteria is quite restrictive, but if you're a single parent, then you've got to be working more than 16 hours a week. But if you're a couple, then you've both got to be working at least 16 hours a week. So you can't get this doubling up if you have, say, a partner, one of you, like Ricky, might be at home looking after children, which I do personally find slightly odd, because there are lots of benefits from children going to preschools, etc., beyond just pure childcare. And also, if you earn more than £100,000, then you obviously won't get that. So the other issue you've got is, even if you do qualify for that, I think there are going to be a lot of nurseries that aren't going to offer this doubling up, or they're resisting it, because they're saying that the money that the government is paying them does not actually cover the cost associated with providing this level of childcare. So this is a nicety. Everyone gets the 15 hours, but it is going to be doubled to 30 for a select group. So that's one way of reducing your childcare costs. Now, before we get onto the key schemes that most people may be able to use, the other thing to check is whether you qualify for a childcare element of working tax credits. Now, benefits aren't my forte, but you can claim for any child up to the age of 15, and they actually are really complex, the eligibility criteria for whether you can actually get some help. It can equate to around about £3,000 a year help you can actually get. Now, this is effectively free money from the government. So this is, if you can qualify for this is better than any of the other schemes we'll come on to. You will do this. But as a kind of rule of thumb, if you're a single parent and work more than 16 hours a week, or you are a couple again, and both of you have to work more than 16 hours a week, but your total household income is less than 40 grand, you might be able to qualify. It's not guaranteed, but you might need to check. You might be able to qualify for some additional help towards childcare costs. So those are the first two levels, which for some people that may really make a difference. Now, for everybody else, what you then get onto is there's two schemes. The first one is the childcare voucher scheme. Now, I was a fan of this because I've used this in the past, and quite simply what it does, it allows you to pay for, if you're employed, that's the catch. If you're employed, you can effectively pay for childcare from your gross salary, so before tax. And the way that works is your employer has to offer the scheme, but it's a scheme they sign up to, that they actually divert some of your pay and it buys vouchers, not physical vouchers, but it's like they're electronic. And then what happens is you have a play group or whatever that your child will go to, that's obviously one of the official Ofsted registered ones, then you can use those vouchers to pay the bill. It's a bit of a pain to set up if your employer doesn't do it, but or have one already, but it's worth persevering, and there are help and guides for them to do it. So basically they divert part of your pay. What it means is that you can, for an ordinary basic rate taxpayer, by the time because you can do it at gross salary, it means you can get like a 30% discount on the cost of childcare. So it's a great idea. It's done per parent as well, which which most people don't realise. So if you are a couple, the mum and the dad, if they're working, can do this and they're employed. So it means that you can save up to about £900 a year on childcare costs, which is nothing to be sniffed at. Now, the government looked at this scheme and they decided to change it a while back, and they announced it in a budget. And one of the things that they've done, they've created a new scheme that's going to be called the new tax-free childcare scheme, which is apparently about to launch. The details are fairly sort of sketchy, but based on what was said in the budget, in the kind of small print, this is going to be out there imminently, and it's an alternative scheme. Now, the old scheme, the childcare voucher scheme, is going to close at the end of this tax year. So by April 2018, if you aren't already signed up to that voucher scheme, you won't be able to. You'll have to join a new one, and the new one is a very different animal. The way it's supposed to work is there's going to be a government-backed account, so like a national savings and investment product that you can put money in. So for every 80p you put in, the government tops it up with another 20p. And so it's a kind of almost like a tax relief in a way. Do you mean they top it up? It's a bonus. It's not really tax relief. But what it means is you can put in up to £8,000 a year per child. So this one is per child, not per parent. It's per child. And then you can get an extra £2,000 on top. So that £2,000 bonus can then be spent on, obviously, again, childcare, but it has to be spent on childcare. You can't do anything else. Now, to qualify, again, there's these caveats. So you have to work at least 16 hours. That's, again, a single parent or both parents if you're a couple. And neither of you can earn more than £100,000 a year. The positive is that it means it's open to self-employed people. So where in the past, if you were self-employed, you didn't get any help towards childcare, it was kind of, that's tough. Now this means you could take advantage of this scheme. You can only be a member of one of them. You can only use one or the other, so you're going to have to make a decision. And now, obviously, people aren't going to be able to qualify for both, but there will be some people who do qualify for both. So it's going to be a case of which is best. Now, for those people who are eligible, which will be very few for both schemes, because the second scheme is per child and you can get that extra sort of £2,000 help a year. If you had 3 children, say, that means you could get an extra £6,000 help towards childcare. But obviously with the old scheme, the childcare voucher scheme, it's based on tax relief and what you earn and how much you can put in. So therefore there's a restriction. You're only going to get up to about £900 per year. So the kind of rule of thumb on this is that if you're going to be having big childcare costs, then the new scheme is probably going to be better for you. Whereas if it's going to be based upon you're going to have slightly lower childcare costs than the old scheme will, because think about it, you're getting tax relief at up to like 30% plus on your childcare costs under the old scheme, but the new one, it's just a 20% top up, so it's like 20 versus sort of 30% plus. That's why the old scheme works for smaller amounts, but the problem is there's a lower upper limit on the old scheme. So I hope that makes sense and has sort of covered the whole childcare thing for people, because I think it's a minefield, but it just shows there are possibilities. Keep an eye out for the new tax-free childcare scheme, because you'll probably get more details as the sort of year progresses, but apparently it is imminent.
Right, good stuff. Are we done?
We are done, actually. Well, no, we're not. I wanted to quickly talk about something on investing. It's just going to be a very quick thing, just to get people a little bit excited. But before I do that, do you remember we've been talking about Flipper? And you did it, Andy. You obviously inspired a wave of people to do it, because Flipper actually emailed me and sort of to say thanks for mentioning them. And obviously we do things on the podcast. We talk about what we want to talk about. And they obviously heard about the podcast, because they must ask people where they found out about them as a company. And a whole load of people kept saying they heard about it on our podcast. So it just shows you the power of what we do, Andy. People do listen, and more importantly, the power of what you do, Andy, because you're or what you don't do. I don't know which way round it is, but yeah, what you eventually do. It shows you that people obviously listen to what we say.
Oh, there we go. That's nice to hear. Right, so what we got on the investing side?
Well, what I wanted to talk about just on the investing side, I did a whole piece of work for the 80/20 investor members out there, and because it's a momentum-based idea for for the data for the fund tables, I thought it'd be fun, because people have asked that what we do is we actually group some of the sort of best selection each month, so that's like the top selection, into low, medium and high risk funds. So we put them in those 3 categories, and it was a very lengthy piece of research that I've done to see what would have happened if somebody had just looked at the low risk or just at the medium and just at the high. And it was fascinating, and I just wanted to mention it because if people are interested, look, would this help me if I was wanting to go hell for leather and go for high risk stuff, or is it all about low risk investing, or is it medium risk? And you can get a free 30-day trial, as people know, and they can go and look at the research. But what was interesting, it backs up the analogy that I'm always talking about when it comes to riding investment trends, and that is the idea that you need trends, you need change, you need some form of volatility to happen in markets. So it's a good thing when markets move up and down, despite our inherent fear or dislike of it. And the analogy of surfing, which I come back to many times, many times, maybe I should write a book about it, I don't know, is that if you're going to ride a trend, it's a bit like trying to surf. So if you think about the low risk end, it's like trying to surf in a very almost calm lake, or where there's very low ripples. It's very hard to ride anything if it's like that. The middle ground is where the perfect stuff happens, where you're in the sea with the really good waves, and you get some big ones and small ones. That's where you can make some amazing returns and really ride it. Equally, the really big waves, like the tidal waves of this world, you can do some amazing stuff and ride them. But of course, it is far more inherently risky, and you're going to have some big ups and downs along the way, which if you can cope with that, then that's fantastic. So I just wanted to throw it out there because it just showed what we've been doing for these years. And when you see it play out, you do the research and look at how did this happen, and you give it to everybody to look at and analyse themselves. It was absolutely fascinating, and it actually proved the whole point of what we were doing all those years ago when I locked myself in a room and said that this is how things should play out in the world of investing. That you should have, what you really want is that kind of middle ground, and you can use it in the sort of low and high risk areas in particular. Then it's just very interesting. So if you're in any way interested in riding trends and investing and using that, then, and you are somebody of us probably a middle ground investing ilk and you don't know where to invest, then go and have a look at it. Because the thing is, if you are a low risk investor, it's very hard to amplify anything, but we managed to do it, and we managed to squeeze those extra returns out on those low risk stuff. You're not going to set the world alight, but you are actually making a difference. So anyway, that's what I wanted to get people slightly excited about, is that they can go and see the fallout of each of those different portfolios, because we always look at it as the whole, because we like to run a balanced idea that people hold high, medium and low funds. But I actually look to say what would happen if you just held each part, and you can therefore see the components. It's a compelling bit of research, but then perhaps I would say that, given that I actually did it. So that's us done this week, Andy. One of the things I think Andy's done brilliantly, because unbeknown to any of you listen to this podcast, Andy is in an office, in a room that's got lots of glass windows, and he was just talking about the idea that it's from the whole day where the heat's built up inside, and he's now sitting in it recording his podcast. He's struggling to get the temperature down from a steady, I think, 27 degrees or 28 degrees in there. So he's done well. He's a lot slimmer than when he started the podcast, but
yeah, I'm currently at 28.9 degrees, but that's fine. That's fine. We can open the windows after the pod and I'll be cooling down, you'll be glad to know. So please, everyone, do get in touch with Damien in the usual way. It's podcast@moneytothemasses.com, or you can get in touch with Damien on his Twitter feed. He loves to answer your questions. It's @moneytothemasses with the number 2.
Yeah, and do check out One Giant Leap and leave lots of positive reviews. So that's it for this week, Andy. Until next time, remember, it may be 2 weeks that you hear from us again, but don't worry, we will be back.
Until next time.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.